Good morning. So welcome to the next video lecture of She Stoops to Conquer. In the earlier class we have dealt with the summary, the act-wise summary and the character sketch of different characters which is there in the play She Stoops to Conquer. We have also looked at the significance of the title and how Kate Hartzell and her character justifies the title. Now let's look at the next slide, which is mostly about the themes that She Stoops to Conquer, the comedy of manners drama, deals with. The first point is country versus city. Now if you look at it, Mrs. Hardcastle is a person who really loves to live in a city, whereas Mr. Hardcastle is completely opposite to that. He hates city and wants to spend most of his time in the country itself. So in the earlier act itself, you can see the dialogue between Mr. and Mrs. Hardcastle, where the establishment of this theme of country versus city is properly established within these two characters. And Mr. Hardcastle regards the city as a center of folly and foppery, all that is evil, whereas while Mrs. Hardcastle finds the city as an intriguing center of style and fashion, one which any person could update itself. And for him, that is for Castle or Mr. Hardcastle, London is a center of follies and fopperies. That's another word which is used again and again by Mr. Hardcastle throughout the drama. Second is about social class and snobbery. If you look at the beginning of Act 2, you can see this this whole social class and snobbery being well reflected in the characters. Let's say Hardcastle coaches his servants in social refinements, now cautioning them not to assume they are part of a visiting company who are their betters. So there is an order that has been kept by both of them. That is, Hardcastle insists his servants to keep up the order, that he doesn't consider his servants as equal to the noble people, that is Charles Marlowe and George Hastings, who's going to visit them. So they, in a way, he wants them to behave or to stick to their social class. Now Hastings and Marlowe display considerable snobbery. Obviously they are the guests, so obviously they reflect some amount of snobbery within them. And you have Kate, who courts Marlowe by leading him to believe she is a humble barmaid, because he seems to have a preference for young women of lower social class. We have gone through the same thing while we were looking at Kate's character, that Kate wants to stoop to the level of a barmaid so that she could win the favor of Charles Marlowe, who always feel a limited confidence when he is he is in the company of noble women. Then before Kate finally reveals she is Hardcastle's daughter, Marlowe dismisses the possibility of a match, since he is still under the impression that Kate is a poor relation, as she tells him in Act 4. Yes, that this person, that is Charles Marlowe, really likes Kate. But the fact that Kate belongs to a lower class makes him stop from even proposing marriage to her. So that itself shows the hypocrisy within Charles Marlowe, and also there is an establishment or a proper establishment of the social class, the way these people behave within the drama and also within the society in which they live in. Third point we are looking at is generational conflict. Obviously you have the Mr. Hardcastle, Mrs. Hardcastle, and all the elder members within the drama, or the characters within the drama, forms a different kind of a generation, whereas Tony Lumpkin, George Hastings, etc. forms a different kind of generation. So to the first point, we are looking at Tony Lumpkin's character, and Tony Lumpkin is more rebellious, which you can identify with a younger generation, and is also a prankster. He refuses to conform to his mother's wish that he refrain from going to the Three Pigeons, which is the local alehouse. And Hardcastle, who is Tony's stepfather, states his disapproval of the young man's behavior and leads his companion to the joys of drinking. We have already looked into these characters in the earlier slide, where their Three Pigeons, the local alehouse, forms a very integral part of the whole plot. So there is this generational conflict between Mr. Hardcastle and Tony Lumpkin. Then Constance Neville also has a similar problem with her aunt, because her aunt pedigree always, or let's say not aunt pedigree actually, it is Miss Hardcastle always makes attempt at matchmaking, though she chooses to do so in a more subtler way. So Constance is completely against that attitude of Mrs. Hardcastle. And then you have the couple George Hastings and Constance Neville, and their rebellious outlooks is constantly or concisely captured in the letter to Tony, in which George refers to Mrs. Hardcastle as a hag. That's a word that is exactly being used. Now, even in the older generation also deceives their children. You can see that in an attempt to control Tony Lumpkin, because he is more like a what do you say? You can't call him as a gypsy. It's more like he's a meanderer. He's a spendthrift. He spends a lot of money. So in order to control her son, Mrs. Hardcastle, together with her husband, has kept the truth as a secret that he has matured enough to lead his own life. So I know when you look at the drama, you feel that it's more illogical, but that illogicness is what makes this comedy of manners so much of a comic figure. Or let's say George Hastings, or sorry, not George Hastings, Tony Lumpkin, a comic figure. So next is the generational conflict. Could also be seen in the contrasting opinions of Kate and her father have of Charles Marlowe, especially if you remember the act where the father always quarrels, or let's say always scolds Kate for behaving in such a manner that for I mean, he in a different way asks her to behave in a more noble manner to Charles Marlowe, because Charles Marlowe has taken her for a barmaid. Next point is the mistaken identity. Yes, there are a lot of instances of mistaken identity. You have the primal mistaken identity being inaugurated by Tony Lumpkin, who plays a practical joke on the travelers from London, that is Charles Marlowe and George Hastings, because they have been sent to instead of three pigeon house, they have been sent to Mr. Hardcastle's home. And Kate Hardcastle also makes the disguised identity against Charles Marlowe. That's another instant. And Tony Lumpkin's practical joke of positioning Hardcastle as a humble innkeeper instead of a well-to-do country squire, it generates the more plays humor and social satire. If you look at it, it forms the centrality of all the comic elements within the play. And the next point is courtship and love. Yes, you have a lot of courtship and love that is going on within the play. The thing that Goldsmith tries to emphasize is that obstacles couples overcome on their way to marriage. What are the obstacles that any couple has to undergo to reach the final consummation, or let's say marriage? In a way, Goldsmith also emphasizes on how an individual psychology can create impediments to developing a romantic relationship. That is a man's point of view or a woman's point of view regarding marriage and love could be a kind of an obstacle for a proper married life or a proper love life. Let's say, for example, the character of Marlowe, who is unable to interact with women of his own class because he's so afraid of embarrassing himself. That itself is a kind of an interesting character. That's the reason why Marlowe is not able to communicate with a noble woman, and it's only when Kate is ready to stoop below her social class that Marlowe's real character or real romantic character comes into play. And then that's the same thing which explores the battle that goes on inside someone who's anxious about courtship and marriage. So this psychology has been properly emphasized and analyzed by Goldsmith through the character Charles Marlowe. And then you have another instance of courtship and love in Constance and Hastings. And Constance's guardian, Mrs. Hardcastle, wants Constance to marry her son Tony, thereby keeping Constance's inheritance in her family. So courtship and love is being pushed onto these two people by Mrs. Hardcastle, so that she could earn some money out of it. So it's So courtship and love gives another frame of play where commercialism, or let's say materialism, is given more importance rather than the emotion. Next comes the theme called fashion and tastes. I think I have divided these into different sections. So let's say fashion. The play suggests that individuals should intelligently weigh the fashions and tastes of the day and flexibly adopt only those parts of the culture that truly fit their situations. Yes, exactly. That's why Mr. Hardcastle, he is okay with his country style, whereas Mrs. Hardcastle is not okay with not only her stay in the countryside, but also with her family stay in the countryside. So she is in one or the other way wants the others to succumb to her style, which obviously Mr. Hardcastle never does. Tawny Lumpkin, if you look at that word itself, is a country bumpkin. That is, he is a man who is really comfortable with the country style of life. And Hardcastle is old fashioned and long winded veteran. So obviously, he is more into that countryside style. And Mrs. Hardcastle is more a status obsessed. So she feels that by being city oriented, she gets a more lively and more respectable status. And then you have Mr. George Hastings. Yes, he is well dressed, but he does not take himself or his personal style also seriously, just like Mrs. Hardcastle. He makes light jokes about the fashion obsessed people around him, but does not take the concerns to heart. He just gives that uh, amount of his skepticism towards this life through his conversation. Doesn't take completely to his heart. And Kate is another character. Kate represents the play's ideal for how an individual should relate to the tastes of her time. You should blend yourself. So she blends therefore an interest in the current fashion with an awareness of the value of tradition, wearing the clothes popular among people of her own age in the morning and clothes her father prefers at night. If you look at Kate is a kind of a representation of the contemporary women, where they try to fit into the family's traditional outlook and at the same time tries to maintain her own independent outlook. So you have a combination of both these things upon Kate. So you have the country fashion and also the city fashion amalgamated together into the character of Kate Hardcastle. So when she discovers that her old-fashioned clothing has led Marlowe to take her for a barmaid, she turns the situation to her advantage, and each of their next encounters, she gradually shifts the persons she is playing until she has won Marlowe's heart. So even the old traditional way of dressing which her father wants her to do is the main reason why Marlowe take her for a barmaid, because when he looks at her, he feels that, who could wear such a dress at this kind of an age? So that itself is responsible for the communion of Kate and Charles Marlowe. Now, completely opposite to Kate, earlier couple, Kate and Marlowe have parents who promise not to force them to marry anyone they do not like. That is same case to when it comes to Charles Marlowe, Sir Charles Marlowe, or whether it is to Mr. Hardcastle, that they never forces their daughters to get married to a person. They say it is completely your choice. So this is quite uh, way before the age. You can consider that kind of attitude by Marlowe and Mr. Hardcastle is way before, ahead of the times, you can call that. So Marlowe has plenty of money and his family doesn't care that Kate doesn't have as much. Quite unusual for the dramatic conventions of Goldsmith City. So in that way, their attitude, they're more, let's say, uh, what do we call? They are more forward thinking people. So Tony thinks that he's unable to marry the girl of his choice, Bet Bouncer, who is mentioned only in a limited way, because he is not old enough to marry without his mother's permission. That's also there when it comes to fashion. And fashion annotates the last slide, or let's say point, which Goldsmith wants to take through this drama is that he wants to satirize the characters' rigid adherence to contemporary fashions by showing characters who exaggeratedly embody a number of different cultural trends. That's the main thing that he wants to propagate through the theme fashion and tastes. You look at Marlowe is considered to be a macaroni. Macaroni is that means a fashion obsessed person, a travel obsessed person, a manneristic type of young man, often caricatured at the time. That's the proper meaning of macaroni. So these are the characters, or these are the points which has been promulgated through fashion and taste. So with this, it's the end of the slide, end of this video lecture too. Thank you for listening. So these are the themes. Please do go through the slides and get back to me if you have any doubts. Thank you.